So today we're going to talk about health stresses and coping. So we're going to start with the basics. First, we're going to see what health psychology basically is. Then we're going to talk about health psychologists. And then we will revolve our entire lecture around stress and stress responses and stress mediation. And let's start and we'll actually build on the lecture. So first, starting with health psychology. So it's actually a new term. It came to us some 50 years ago. So what we're seeing today is basically a shift. Before, people actually were more susceptible to acute conditions, or acute diseases rather were more common. But today, in today's world, the chronic conditions are actually prevalent, and they are more found, or their incidence is quite higher than acute conditions. And so we see that chronic conditions are actually affected by the thought process of a person, the way that they perceive their environment, or the way that they, contemplate or comprehend the different situations that they're presented with. So all of these different factors actually influence how people are now responding to even treatments to their diseases. So people started asking questions like exactly these questions, that why some people, respond to treatments well, and then there are people who are not responding to the similar treatments for similar diseases. And then with research, people, drawed these conclusions, or they deduced these reasons, and mainly most of those reasons were their psychology, or their way of interpreting their environment and their entire process, the way that they processed or understood their environment. So that's a little bit of a history, or a little bit of insight about this field. So what we're going to talk about, or we're going to start our entire lecture from the very basics. So psychology and medicine, right? So these are two different fields, but now there is a lot more interaction between them. And this is because of the fact that, like I explained, there are more incidents of chronic conditions, and psychology, or human behavior is actually influencing treatments of medical conditions now. So to start, let's just define psychology. So psychology is basically the study of your mind and your behavior, right? And then medicine obviously deals with different medical condition, and you obviously require medical treatment in the form of diseases or drugs. So psychology and medicine are now really related, and we're going to talk about this in detail moving on as well. Now we're going to see another close connection between physical health and mental health. So all of these four things are actually related to one another as well. So how does psychology actually affect physical health, and how is physical health related to medicine and mental health? So this is really easy to explain in a way that if we just break them down, all of these things. So psychology is your behavior, right? What you perceive out of your environment, and how you cope with different conditions in your environment, or they may be inside you. Your own thoughts also influence the way that your attitude is being formed, or your entire mood is going to be also determined by your inner thought process, as well as your exterior environment. And by exterior environment, I mean everything that is happening, not just the material things, but also the people around you, or where you work, where you live, your entire socioeconomic background. All of these factors, we're going to talk about them in detail afterwards as well. But to just sum it up, everything, psychology is actually a very large domain. It's really hard to understand, but we're going to try to do that. By the end, everybody will be clear. So psychology, and we're actually trying to relate psychology with physical health right now. So how do we do that? Basically, anyone who has ever, witnessed, I'm pretty sure that everybody has, gone through this So it's really very common that whenever we have some stress or whenever someone's under stress, what happens is their entire drive or their motivation for work actually decreases. So that's how physical health is affected. So that's one way of looking at it. And there are some behaviors that actually are determined by your entire thought process or the way that you cope to your environment. And for example, like some people drink when they're sad and they smoke when they're sad. So that in itself is actually because of their underlying thought process or their psychology. It's under that domain, and then it affects their physical well-being as well as it affects with their or maybe causing their the diseases. For example, if a person let's say smokes cigarettes, so they're bound to or it's there's a high probability of them developing some sort of lung disease or respiratory disease. Let's just say that they develop COPD. Okay, so that's because of their certain behavior that they cope with sadness in a certain way, as they maybe smoke cigarettes to do to really relieve themselves of that sadness. So that's just, this is just hypothetical and this theory based, just to make you understand. So then what happens is, obviously, if one develops, because COPD, one of the main causes is actually smoking cigarettes, right? So if one does develop that disease, so then the ultimate treatment is via medicines, right? So that is how these are sort of related, but this is just a connection that I made just to explain, but there are many other ways that this connection can be really, justified, and it is justified, and it's right now universally accepted that these are really dependent on one another, and there is a really increasing role of psychologists in the healthcare providing team. So then we have mental health. So these are actually connected by certain terms. Let's just look at them as well. So then we have health psychology. So health psychology is basically the way that you're thinking, the way that your mood is governed, or whatever your mood is. Some people are really optimistic all the time. Some people are really always just positive and thinking of things in that way, and then some people are actually always perceiving things negatively, and these are actually type of personalities that we will talk about as well, but these and other factors actually determine the way that they're going to cope with the changing events, right? And so that ultimately also affects their health and any treatment that they're having. So this is health psychology. Health psychology basically is, why some people are really getting better really soon because of their maybe optimism or their will to get better. So that all of these things come under this domain. So then we have behavioral medicine. So behavioral medicine is, like I said, the entire cigarette smoking example actually fits perfectly in behavioral medicine because it's actually your behavior or your coping mechanism to certain, external factors that drive a person to maybe smoke, maybe drink, or do other things as well. So then they can actually interfere with their, or cause their them some diseases, or cause some diseases in them. So that's how these are related. And then we have clinical psychology. So clinical psychology is when your entire thought process is actually affecting your mental health, right? So we say, a sound mind and a sound body and all of that. So it actually is a sound mind and a sound body, right? So That's actually if your mental health is affected by the way that you're thinking or perceiving, or the type of person or the type of personality rather that you have. So that's actually under the domain of clinical psychology. But then it's very serious if you have a mental condition and so that actually kind of relates to medicine if the condition is really serious. Like, for example, we say the psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia. So they are really hard to, those patients rather are really hard to really, it's hard to make them understand because it's a universal thing that, they don't accept that they have this condition. So that's the number one symptom, is that they're in denial. And this is the one thing that psychologists do, this is the first and foremost, there are certain things that psychologists really address. So one is denial. So denial is something that they address and they want that elephant out of the room in the very first session. They want the person to actually at least accept their circumstances. So the thing is that a lot of people come to psychologists and they, let's just actually hypothetically make a situation. Like, for example, let's just say that somebody works somewhere and they don't like a person that they're working with, okay? So the person is giving them a hard time, or they don't like them for certain, personal reasons or whatever. So the first thing that person who doesn't like working with a certain person, so for example, if I don't like working with this person X at a workplace, then the first thing that I would want, human rationality actually does acknowledge this fact. What I would want is that person to just disappear and go away. And that's what I will want. The first thing that I would want would be this. And then unless somebody helps me, or unless I sit down and, really contemplate on that, and most people don't. And so they don't reach that acceptance level on their own. And this is something that psychologists argue. So another very important thing that psychologists are, focusing on from their very first session is exercise. And that is another way to really connect physical health with psychology. So when you're exercising, when you're walking in the morning, or if you add nutrition in this 4 domains, nutrition also plays a part. So if you're eating healthy, so all of these things are actually going to influence your, psychological sound mind, or the way that you perceive is going to be positive. So that's one way of looking at physical health in relation with psychology. Also, you can incorporate like nutrition in it, because no matter what complaint the patient comes with, a psychologist is going to recommend them a good nutrition plan, is going to advise them to drink a lot of water, to maybe exercise more, go for a walk, do some cardio. So all of these things are going to affect their physical health, and in the long haul, they're going to have a positive impact on the person's entire behavior, mood, and that's ultimately going to improve the quality of life. So like I said, because the world is right now, in today's world, there are more chronic conditions as compared to acute conditions. So in chronic conditions, what we want is to reach that optimal qualitative life. And so that is why there is this increased holistic approach of dealing with different diseases or different medical conditions. So that is why now people incorporate nutrition, or their physical well-being, the exercises, the psychological well-being of a person when they're really treating some medical condition as well. So this is all about health psychology, and now we're going to talk a little bit about health psychologists. So before really going into the detail, let's just go over it in general. So this is just basically what psychologists do is they divide their entire plan of action into 3 categories. So the first one is the examiner is going to, the psychologist is actually going to be an examiner, and are really, an observer, really. So what psychologists do in the initial stages is that they actually ask the patient what is different, right? So most of the people who come to psychologists, they come with conditions like we were able to concentrate on work, or we were able to work, or we were able to sleep for this many hours, but now those hours have decreased, or our working capacity has decreased, or our motivation has decreased. So first of all, psychologists address this domain of the patient's, entire examination or history, or whatever the patient is telling. So, what psychologists do is they ask open-ended questions, and then they try to establish what are the differences, and then what was the entire time span in which these differences started occurring, and what were the things, or in the environment, what were the happenings of your environment, inside or outside, what was happening in your life. And these are the type of questions that follow after a psychologist has established that there are differences. So there was optimal functioning, and then there was suboptimal, or sometimes really, really bad functioning. So that is the first thing that a psychologist likes to establish. So the second thing is that they really pinpoint that problem, and then they try to make the patient really acknowledge the fact, at least, that this problem is not going to go away. So like I said, denial, or really just wishing for things to disappear, or stuff like that, that is what people want when they don't like something, or when they don't have it their way. So what psychologists do in the second phase is basically make the patient, or the person that they're talking to, acknowledge the fact that things are not going to, change. So this is something that you're going to have to live with, and you're going to have to maybe change the way that you go about things, maybe change your entire strategy, maybe try to talk to a certain person who's, having a conflict with you. So these are the type of things. So this counseling is actually the second part of the examination. Then what the takeaway thing that the psychologist is giving the patient is the third phase. So that is something for example, they're going to tell them the entire routine. They're going to tell them the things that they need to incorporate, how they need to change, and they're going to give them an entire plan. And then they're going to repeat that trial. And they're going to ask the patient to come back, and they're just going to really systemically then progress to betterment. And that's the entire way that psychologists really go about every patient. So this is applicable to whatever the disease of any patient really is. So now we're going to look at it. So first, there is we analyze, like I said. So the first step is you analyze. And then obviously counseling. So I kind of divided it into three portions, and that's mainly just in general, that's the division. But we can also divide it in these ways in which this is actually a 5 divisions. So, but this is actually the same. So we first analyze, and then we advise, that is basically counseling. And then we design that entire plan. So these are the 3 components, the main ones. And then what we are designing is basically going to be in segments, and that's going to be in trials in a way. So trials is something, here trials means that first you're going to go about the entire situation in one way. You're going to apply this one, entire treatment plan that you've designed as a psychologist for the patient, considering whatever you have deduced the condition is. and that's going to be your trial number one. And because psychology is really complex, because you cannot apply one thing universally. Everybody has their own way of coping with things, their own attitude, their own environment, their own coping mechanisms. So that is why in psychological examination or treatment plans, there are trials, and these trials are actually for the entire diagnosis. Actually, looking at if your diagnosis was correct, and rather if your treatment plan is working or not. So this is trial, and then we have train. So when you know that your trial is successful and this is actually working for this patient, then you train the patient to reach conclusions on their own. So then you actually move forward on teaching the patient to actually reach the conclusions themselves. You actually want, ultimately the goal is to make the patient or the person who's come to you for consultation, you want to make them adept, or really have that capability of really fighting with the environment, or really that's really harsh, but coping in the environment, or actually reaching conclusions, or that entire analysis of the environment has to be on their own. They have to do it on their own, and then they have to really accept, and then they have to really go about the changing circumstances or some stresses on their own. And that's what we're going to, in the end, train the patient to do themselves without any external guidance. So that's the ultimate goal. So this is basically what health psychologists do and how they divide their work. And now we're going to talk a little bit about stress and stressors. So we've been using this word. So stress is anything that is beyond your normal coping, threshold. So if anything is beyond your coping threshold, something that is maybe sudden, or maybe something that you don't like, so we call that a stress. In psychology, that's what stress is. Something that is new to you, or something that you're not prepared for. So that's a stress. And stressors are all obviously those events, or those things, or sometimes those people who are actually causing you stress. So this is somebody under stress, obviously. And so this is just one way. So this is actually what they think about. This is just to really, show that the entire thought process just changes under stress. So even if you're somebody who is, somebody who's positive, ultimately just becomes somebody who is going to be really worried in a stressful condition, and you're just going to think about the negatives. That's just what this means. So these are all the negative things that that are showing here. So again, these are the stress and stressors. I wanted to demonstrate that. So could be some, you failed at an exam, that could be a stress, really, but there can be some serious ones, like the loss of some loved one or loved ones, or something of that sort, some trauma, some any such conditions are called stressors, and they can be minor stressors, they can be really severe ones as well. So again, something to understand here is stresses are a person is adequately equipped to deal with certain stresses, especially if they are predictable. The unpredictable ones are the troublemakers. They are the types of stresses that a person cannot or isn't really adequately equipped with, innate or intrinsic ability, with that innate or intrinsic ability to really, go about it themselves and, reach to that conclusion that, we have to deal with this. So the thing is that depression and all of these things, they kind of result under stress, when the stress is actually chronic and you don't know what to do, and when there are multiple stresses, for example. We're going to talk about that as well. So obviously money is also a stress, especially in today's world. So if you don't have money, you can't, like for example, you can't go to school, or you can't pay for your let's say you can't pay your rent, or things like that. So those are really stressful conditions. And also anything that makes your motivation go down, your income go down, or anything really. Just this is just a graph showing that something is going down. Again, all the stresses and stress and stressors. And now here we are talking about stress reaction. So what happens when you're under stress? So here we're going to talk about physiology a little bit. We're just going to, touch the tip of the iceberg really, because we're actually going to focus more on the psychology portion rather than the physiology portion. But this is basically okay, so one thing to understand is your brain is actually which portion of your brain actually is responsible for coping with stress, or really this the functioning of brain under stress. So it's the same as the portion of brain which is responsible for thinking. So our prefrontal cortex is responsible for the entire thought process, formulation, the creativity, also the decision-making power. So all of these are the functions of prefrontal cortex, and so is stress reaction. Whenever you're in or under any stress, or in a stressful condition, so the stress reaction actually begins in your prefrontal cortex, and ultimately your hypothalamus releases hormones, and then your pituitary releases some hormones, and then ultimately cortisol from adrenal gland is released, and then that is actually a steroid hormone that we all know it's responsible for a number of changes. It kind of increases your blood pressure and your heart rate. It's also a natural anti-inflammatory. So all of these functions. And then what happens is under stress, you are a person who's under stress, they produce more platelets or fibrinogen. So all of these things, we're going to systemically, talk about them. So first again, so like I said, to stimulate your adrenal gland, first your prefrontal cortex is activated, then your pituitary, and then ultimately adrenal gland. So hypothalamus, and then pituitary, and then your adrenal gland. So adrenal gland actually releases the natural narcotic, so that is cortisol. So that's a natural inflammatory as well, like we said. So then serotonin. So, there are some happy hormones that everybody knows about. So these are serotonin, endorphins, and dopamine. So these are really important. But also if we don't have dopamine and serotonin, we don't just get sad. We also, can get Parkinson's disease, right? So, okay, coming back. So serotonin, we have adrenaline. So adrenaline is also obviously in a stressful condition, there is release of adrenaline because you have that adrenaline rush, because your pupils dilate and your heart rate rises and shoots up actually, and your BP goes shooting as well, and your skin goes pale. So all of these flight and fight reactions because of your parasympathetic activation. So those are actually what is happening here because of stress. So that is why basically we say that anyone who's susceptible to a cardiac condition, we're going to talk about that moving further in the lecture as well, but just to touch it a little bit. So anybody who has sort of like a cardiac condition, we actually ask them not to take any stresses, and we ask their family members to keep a very calm environment around them, because all of these things are because of the stresses. So another really important, a very interesting thing that I read was that, this is a really, really like a bubble, because we know that the pain is actually felt in our brain, right? So I cut myself, let's just suppose that I cut myself here. So this cut is actually not causing the pain is actually in my brain. And that's because, whenever you have a spinal cord injury, it's a really basic argument that really, no races do. But anyways, I'm going to code it here anyway. So, when you have a spinal cord injury, this cut on my arm is perfectly okay. The damage is in my cervical. Let's just, God forbid, if I do have a cervical problem, let's just say I'm paralyzed thoracic down. So what will happen is my cut will not be painful anymore, even though my muscle or my blood supply here is perfectly normal, my anatomy here is perfectly normal, but I won't feel it. So we say, it's just in the brain, pain is just in the brain. So, and obviously we know the entire physiology, but let's not go into the detail of that. And so what happens is the stress is actually the opposite. So stress is something that's in the brain, but the effect is actually elsewhere in the body. So really interesting is something that I read, which is that under stress, your brain is not the most affected organ system, or your spinal cord or your central nervous system collectively is not the organ system that is most affected, but rather it is your digestive system that is most affected under stressful conditions. So there is very changes in the way that your enzymes function and the way that they're released in your digestive system. Also in stressful conditions, we know that the digestive system actually kind of just it stops, it slows down, and if the stress is really severe and it's abrupt and it's not predictable, or it wasn't predicted, then digestive activity almost completely stops and there is no peristaltic movement. So yes, we do know that, but it was really interesting rather for me to learn that our digestive system is actually basically the most affected under stress. So anyways, moving on. So we have established that adrenaline actually does cause that adrenaline rush. So it's released in stressful conditions, obviously. And then we have norepinephrine, same function. Then we have this release of stored sugar. Why? Because we need that energy to really, just get going. And that's why a lot of blood sugar is released. And then ultimately there is increase in pulse rate because of that, adrenaline rush and norepinephrine. And again, there is release of insulin to, really counter that increase in blood sugar. So that's like a regulatory mechanism working on its own, and we all know how that works. So this is actually how your body is responding to stressful conditions. And then we're going to see some more stress reactions. And here we're going to talk about the potential stressors. And these are actually these life-changing strains, okay? So these potential stressors can be anything. Loss of, like we've been talking about, like I've been talking about. So loss of somebody, loss of a job, anyone you don't like that you have to bear with every day. So that can be like a chronic stress. So, that, again, catastrophic events. So these are really severe potential stressors. So life-changing strains, and then catastrophic events. Then daily hassles is a sort of like a minor one. So you have to get up, and then you have so many different things that you have to do. And that obviously creates a stress on you. And then we have some chronic stressors. Like I said, there are a lot of chronic stressors, like I'm again and again going to that example, but for example, in a workplace, you have to just bear with that person. And also there can be a lot of other examples as well. So chronic stressors can actually be because of your partner that you're with, or your children, or your bosses, or something that you personally have to go through. So that can be chronic stress as well. And then we have stress mediation. So this is something that we're going to talk about. So stress mediation is basically cognitive appraisal. Again, a very interesting thing that I read was this Dunning-Kruger effect. So this is actually not related to it completely, but it's in a way, because what this says, this Dunning-Kruger effect says that humans are actually incapable of critically appraising themselves. How so? Is that if somebody is not, like for example, let's just make it easy. If I am asked to teach a certain thing, and I don't know how to teach that subject, then I'm actually not going to be able to really figure out if I'm a good teacher or not. So if I think that that subject, I'm not aware of that subject, for example, let's say, and I'm teaching that subject, so I'm not going to be able to really judge myself or my ability, because I don't know what the optimal standard of knowledge is for that subject. So I will not be able to really judge myself. And then it also applies to people who are really good at their work. For example, I'm really good at teaching a certain subject, but then I will underestimate myself, because I will think that this is actually how everybody teaches the subject. And I will actually kind of just, again, underestimate myself. So this is actually Dunning-Kruger effect. So it says that you will either underestimate or overestimate yourself. So, and as a result, you can never really critically praise yourself or, judge yourself or your own ability. So that's really something that I read about cognitive appraisal. Again, but to some extent, you can actually judge yourself. Again, so this cognitive appraisal is actually a mediator. So mediator is something that is actually, internally or sometimes externally as well, because of support systems, is actually toning down or damping down that effect of that stressor. How so? You predict. So like I said, so if you can predict some stressor or some unfortunate event, then the ultimate stress that it's going to produce is going to be a lot less than if it were unpredictable. That unfortunate event, if it were unpredictable, then it would have been a lot more unfortunate and would have caused a lot more stress. Then we also have this very important concept of control. So psychologists actually address this problem very initially as well. So control over things is something that is actually an innate need, or actually a desire rather, of a person, that they want control over their surroundings, at least some control over their surroundings. So this is something that everybody wants, and they actually need it for their satisfaction. And if everything is out of control, then that's actually in itself the biggest stress. So how psychologists actually address this problem is that they say that there are certain things that are not under your control, but the things that are under your control, you can start with that, and then you can obviously change that entire control equation. So that's just, they kind of address. So main problem is for the addressal of these issues. So a person is not aware of themselves being in denial, of themselves not being able to control the environment and how that's affecting them. And that's where the role of a psychologist really comes in. And also, if a psychologist really is kind of helping a person who's also, having this treatment for a medical condition, then obviously just hope and positive thinking actually does affect how your body physiologically reacts to treatment. And you have seen how, stress actually does affect your physiology, and we're actually going to see it again as well. It's coming. So then also mediation is the coping resources and methods. So again, coping is something very individual in nature. So a lot of researchers or psychologists actually agree that coping is something that is different for everybody. It depends upon the personality of the person. It depends upon the environment that they have grown up in. It depends upon the socioeconomic factors. It depends upon so many things, and it's really personal. Okay, so it's really individual and personal. And the methods, obviously, like I said, the trial is actually just to again, evaluate if your treatment is working or not. So that's really different for psychological treatments. So then we have the social support. So that's the extrinsic mediator, right? So the rest of them were actually sort of semi-intrinsic, other than control. You actually want control over the external environment. So it's like semi-innate, but that's again an innate desire. So let's just say that these are semi-intrinsic, one of them, and the rest. So cognitive appraisal is intrinsic. Stress mediator, again, predictability is something that's inside, and if you can, or it can be if somebody else tells you that it could happen, then that also could be predictability. So we can also call that semi-intrinsic, and then control is semi-intrinsic, intrinsic, and then coping resources are actually your own. So that's intrinsic, and then social support is wholly solely extrinsic. And then how potential stressors and stress mediators are responding. So if you have some life-changing effects, how does your cognitive appraisal ability actually jumps in, and how coping mechanisms activate, and how predicting a problem or a future problem, if you're predicting it, how well are you able to adapt to that situation then. So all of these things are actually interrelated in this sense. And then we have stress responses. So this is something that we just talked about. So stress responses actually, all the physiological effects, as well as these physical and psychological, right? So how you respond to stresses physically is actually more based on the physiological effects of stressors that we just discussed in the previous slide. So here the psychological are discussed. So emotional, cognitive, and behavioral. So all of these things actually change under stress. So the way that you behave under stress is different from the way that you behave when it's all calm and cool. And also your emotional or cognitive ability also changes under stress. So under stressful conditions, there are certain things that, so a lot of people say that when you're under stress, don't make, don't hassle in decision. So a lot of these things, because your cognitive ability is actually diminished. And another rational explanation of this, or actually scientific explanation for this, is because your frontal lobe is actually responsible for all of these things, right? Your cognitive thinking, your prefrontal lobe is responsible for that. It's responsible for the stress coping mechanism. It's responsible for these behavioral changes and your creativity and all of these things. So it kind of is overloaded, and it can't really decide which way to go. So that is actually another explanation or another theory that psychologists have researched on. So that is a little bit about stress and stressor. So again, these stress responses are dependent on stress mediators as well as potential stressors, that we can probably predict, or some stressors that are unpredictable. So all of these three things are related to one another, and that is actually the entire relationship between the stressors and how the body is coping up with them, and how the physiological body functions are affected, and how the psychological functions are affected. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the psychological stresses. So here we're going to divide them into two types. So first, we're going to talk about the deprivation of needs. So how being deprived of some basic needs of the mind, it can cause a lot of stress on the mind and the body. So these basic needs can be, your safety, your social needs of friends and family, and the needs of self actualization or self-esteem. So these play a very important role in your perception of yourself. And again, psychologists really focus on one's own perception, and there is a concept that if a person perceives themselves as a sound person, as a person who is capable, then that actually translates into the person's entire brain functioning, it kind of actually makes the person more confident, and that actually increases the work capacity as well as the work efficiency. And so that's really important. These things are really important, and these are the basic requirements of your brain. And so another thing that we can relate here is the rising depression in housewives. So housewives aren't really, given their due basic needs of self actualization of self-esteem are not fulfilled in housewives, because they're not getting the appreciation for their work, and because their work isn't recognized, and their efforts aren't really appreciated. So that's why they're more susceptible to this disorder of the mind that we know as depression. So this is how psychologists are kind of basing their argument on these statistics of so much rising rates of, or rising ratios of depression in these neglected sectors of the society that aren't getting the appreciation, and therefore are more susceptible to depression. And then again, this is why these core basic concepts or these basic needs are actually now given a lot of importance. And then there is another psychological stress type, that is the role conflict. So to understand this, let's just hypothetically assume that I'm a student, and I have to attend some classes in the morning, right? So I attend my classes and then go home, and then I sleep, take a nap, and then I have some, let's just assume this is all hypothetical. So let's assume that I have some sporting academy, or some swimming, that I have to go for swimming, or, basketball, or any of these recreational activities. And then when I come back, I have to complete my papers, which are due. And, after that, I go to bed after dinner. So this is a role for me. So this is condition 1. And then condition 2 is that I go to school, I go back home, and then I actually have to go pick my little brother or my little sister from somewhere, bring them back home, and then I have to go work somewhere. That's a part-time job, because I have to earn the money for my tuition fee, and then I have to come back home and look after, let's just assume that I have a, God forbid, sick parent that I have to look after. So if I'm doing all of these things, so that's in condition B, that is a role conflict. So my role is not defined. I have to do a lot of different things in condition B, right? So that is what we call role conflict. And role conflict is actually a very big stressor, because the brain actually likes discipline, and the brain actually likes everything really clear cut. And this is what psychologists say as well. So if the brain is not supplied with that discipline in life, then that in itself is a very big stressor. So that's what we call the role conflict. So this is the role setting as well as the role specification. So your brain requires you to really specify all of your duties, or the things that you're supposed to do or complete. So any disruption in this specialization of role is actually a role conflict, and that's again one of very major psychological stressor. Then we have this concept of measuring stresses. So what we do is we have certain skills to measure the stresses. This is again another thing that psychologists came up with. These are actually surveys to really measure your stress in life. So the first one is actually life change unit. This is actually a part of social readjustment rating scale. So this is also known as SRRS. So life change units are actually, we divide SRRS, so this is social readjustment rating scale, and these are divided into 43 different stressful conditions. So these are conditions like pregnancy, and conditions like divorce, or all of these stressful conditions are marked, and these are 43. And then every person is given this entire survey form to fill, and for every single one of stressors that are present in their life among those 43 stressors, so that's like one life change unit. So those 43 are 43 life change units. So this life change units, these are 43 in SRRS. And so each one, with each increase in the life change units level, there is it means that your stress is more, or your stress is elevating with the rise of life change units. So this is how social readjustment rating scale works, and this is the basic unit of functioning. So life change units is actually written separately because it's used in a number of other surveys as well, and not just SRRS. And then we also have life experience surveys, which also use life change units, but only some of them. And then there are some additional questions as well. So this is actually a survey of 53 questions. And then it's actually, some of them are open-ended, that you have to write the answer, or actually tell the answer to anybody who's taking your survey, and then they can write it down. So this is, again, a life experience survey, again, is measuring your stresses. So this is actually trying to make something that is qualitative. So, stressors are actually something that is qualitative, right? So it's not something that you can measure. So we're trying to, with these surveys, or these, questionnaires, we're actually trying to convert that qualitative data into quantitative data, so that we can statistically analyze it, right? So after which we can deduce certain things and make them theories, and that's how the entire process of research in psychology, or rather any other field, is actually being carried out. So then we have stress response. Again, we've talked about this in detail. So here is an actual visualization of how the brain is actually, ultimately producing cortisol, right? So this is the amygdala, and then we have prefrontal cortex. So prefrontal cortex is where it starts. So prefrontal cortex, it regulates the stress responses, as well as, making other functions as well. So it is also responsible for, like we said, cognitive ability and other such things. So this is actually regulating the stress response, and then amygdala detects the things that are scary or dangerous. So, if you see somebody crossing the road and a car hits them, and that memory is going to be stored, that scary memory is going to be stored in your amygdala, and whenever you yourself are crossing the road, it'll come back to you because of that dangerous memory being stored. So then that will actually that's like a defense mechanism for your body. And then we have hypothalamus. So that is actually responsible for the hormone release, actually. So hormones are going to be released from the adrenal, which are cortisol. So hypothalamus will activate the pituitary via the pituitary activating hormone, and then ultimately ACTH will be released, and which will again stimulate adrenal gland, and cortisol will be produced. So this is a little bit of physiology that we don't at this moment need to go in. So basically, just hypothalamus is activated via the activation of the prefrontal cortex, where under stress a certain area of your brain starts functioning, and then it activates your hypothalamus, which in turn activates its pituitary gland, and then ultimately the adrenal gland is activated, which produces cortisol. And we have already discussed all of the different types of hormones that are ultimately going to be produced, and the resultant physiological changes in the body and the things that are going to pile up, we're actually going to see them again as well. So this is the adrenal gland. Again, hormones are going to be released from the pituitary, which are going to activate the release of cortisol from the adrenal gland. Again, adrenal gland is the medulla, or an adrenal gland is actually kidneys. So then the ultimate response is actually going to be on the vessels, right? So the cortisol is actually going to be traveling in the vessels to the target sites. So cortisol is actually released from the kidneys, medulla in the adrenal gland to be precise, and then it is going to ultimately go to different areas and produce the effect via traveling through the blood vessels. What it does is, we've already discussed, what it does is basically it's a natural sort of like an anti-inflammatory, as well as a mediator of metabolism. It regulates metabolism, and also it is responsible for the increase in heart rate. It's actually a steroid, and it also is going to increase the pulse rate. And so these are all, and with that, a lot of other changes are also going to be taking place. For example, the blood sugar that we talked about, as well as the insulin. So that's the entire way that your body's physiology is going to be changing under stress. So again, when there is high level of cortisol, it will be the inhibition of hypothalamus will result. So we all know this entire flow of bodily functions, some activating and some inhibiting the other. And then this again is another depiction of stress response. So here hypothalamus is actually a part of the brain, right? So hypothalamus is activated, then autonomic nervous system, so that is not under our control. And then thymus is also present in our neck, is another gland, then adrenal glands releasing cortisol. Catecholamines are released, and then thyroid are the organs that are actually going to be releasing the catecholamines. And then parathyroid is activated by the catecholamines, and so heart and lung function will be affected. So very often we experience palpitations when under stress, right? And sometimes that non-serious cardiac condition that we call pericardial catch. So that is also a condition. So heart is also under stress because of the increased cardiac output as well, and also because of the catecholamines. Then cortex and medulla is also going to be producing catecholamines, and then that is going to affect the kidneys, and then there is going to be release of cortisol, and then liver is also going to be affected. Stomach is also going to be affected. Like I said, stomach and the digestive system is really affected under stress the most. That is something that research says so. So pancreas are also affected by catecholamines, and then we also have bone marrow that is affected by catecholamines. So what psychologists argue is that kids that are, under stressful conditions growing up because of maybe their parents divorcing each other, or maybe just fighting a lot. So what happens is that they have limited growth, or they don't grow very tall or very strong, and that is also another really explanation for their suboptimal growth, because of that stress early on in life that has affected their bone marrow also. So that's how stress actually is such a significant contributor to a lot of different conditions, or ultimately diseases, or things that are not healthy for us. And then there is another side. So hypothalamus also activates the pituitary gland that we've discussed, and then pituitary gland releases beta endorphins, like we said. So endorphins are like happy hormones, and we need them. And then they release ACTH, which is the adrenocorticotrophic hormone, which ultimately activates the adrenal gland to produce cortisol. And we have discussed what cortisol does in the body. So Now we're going to talk about the stress response further. So here we're going to talk about emotional changes that we've discussed. So emotional changes. So this is I'm trying to explain here how these are interlinked. So emotional changes and cognitive changes as well as behavioral responses. So we have touched these things that are responsible for that are actually, the psychological results of stresses. So your emotional changes, your emotion or the way that your entire mood changes, the way that you perceive things changes. So that's emotional change. You get mood swings, and a lot of people have a lot of different disorders, mood disorders. And then we have cognitive changes. So under stress, under psychological stressful conditions, your thinking ability or your rationality sort of like changes, and it's said that it kind of diminishes. Also, your behavioral response actually changes in stressful conditions. It's also that under stressful conditions, these are changed, and because of stressful conditions, chronic stressful conditions, these are acquired on long-term basis. So then they become your personality. So this is something that we're going to talk about. So then stress mediation. So we've been discussing the factor of predictability. So here we're going to talk about something new, okay? So if we're unprepared, so this is when we're unprepared and the first accident occurs, okay? So this is our stress. Okay, so this threshold, this spike is actually, showing that the amount of stress in quantitative measures, how stressful you were, because we're actually trying to relate stress with the sweat that is produced. So we're using the sweat gland activity as a measure of how stressful you are. So in a stressful condition, we're saying that you sweat more. So that's an indication of you being under stress. So this is what we're trying to quantify stress in terms of. So this is the first incident or the first accident or the first unprepared incident, or which is, we're assuming that it was a very unpleasant incident. So this is how much increase in your sweat production was, and then it went obviously back to the normal production of sweat, and then the second accident, and then the third accident. So what we're seeing here is the minimal decrease in the third time that a stress has occurred. So this is not long term, but research actually is building upon this. So in the first few times, this stress is like you're accustomed to that stress, so your sweating is sort of normal. But then if this frequency keeps on increasing, so if there's a fourth accident, fifth accident, sixth accident, seventh accident, and they're close together, then what will happen is this spike will actually go higher than this first accident spike. You'll actually just be sweating all the time, and that's actually going to be something that you're acclimatized with. So that is what psychologists are now, arguing about, that continuous stressful conditions are more dangerous than an unpredictable first one. But here in this graph, just sticking to this, we see that the first unpredictable one actually does cause a lot of, unpleasant emotions, and obviously a lot of sweat too. But like I said, building upon the discussion today in among the psychologists, they say that continuous increase in the frequency of these unprepared events actually increases the stress upon a person. So then we have denial. So denial is something that you're prepared for. You have that, that pinching thought in your brain, or somebody continuously telling you that, this has happened or this is about to happen, but you're in denial. So with that, there is a spike, but then again, it's relatively less than the sweat that was produced when you were unprepared, completely unprepared. And then this is actually somebody who is, prepared for it, relatively prepared for it. And intellectualizers means that people who are, rationally thinking upon their situation and trying to cope up with it. So again, here it kind of, justifies the argument that I was building. So it actually is increasing, right? So intellectualizer here, it says that even in this graph, it shows that people who are, rationally thinking, they're actually more affected with the increase in frequency. So this spike actually is higher than this one, right? So even for this unprepared person, or this unprepared event, when a person was, going through this event or this unfortunate event, then if the frequency were to be increased, the spike would actually go higher moving on if we were to move on in the graph. So that's a little bit about stress mediation and how we can, also this tells us how different ways are, devised and produced to actually quantify stresses, because, it's really a quality and not a quantity, but we can actually quantify it in terms of, maybe the sweat produced or other variables of such. And then let's talk a little bit about predictability and control. So we've been discussing it, and it is very important because predictability and control are some of the factors that psychologists really focus on. So high predictability and high control is when you will have most control over your responses to certain stress, and your stress will actually be low. So you have low stress in an offense, which you have control on and which was predicted. Okay, so if you have low control on your environment or the conditions that you're in or the situation that has presented itself, but you were prepared or you predicted its occurrence, then you can escape it. Okay, so you can't really be offensive, you can't really defeat that stress, but you can escape that stress. Okay, so if the control over your environment is high, but you haven't really been predicting or you really couldn't predict a certain event, then you will be sort of defensive, because you can actually control the environment, but you can't change what has happened. Okay, but you still have some control over your environment. And then the most panicky or the most severe or stressful condition would be if you don't have any control and if you did not predict it at all. So if it's something that shocks you, and if it's something that you cannot control, no component of the situation is under your control, then that is the most severe condition to be in for a person. So this is a little bit about predictability and control when it comes to stress mediation. Then we are going to talk about the coping resources. So what we do is cognitive. We talk a little bit about Dunning-Kruger's, effect and entire argument. But then again, if you're a rationally thinking mind and you're active, you do yoga and everything that people say actually do matter and actually kind of increase your cognitive ability. And if you're thinking on your situation continuously and trying to analyze it, then you are in a better position to cope up with your stresses. Then emotional, so your emotional well-being or your emotional, we say emotional health is actually a concept that we use. So if you're in a good, overall emotional well-being, then you're better equipped to handle stresses. Again, spirituality is something, so a lot of people find solitude in spirituality under stressful conditions, like faith or religion actually does play a part. And then we have physical activity like exercising, so that does play a part as well. And then social support is also an external form of a coping mechanism. So these are some external and internal. Cognitive obviously being internal, and then emotional is something that is semi-internal. It can be affected, or it is rather affected by the external sources, but it's something that is held within the individual. So, and then spirituality again is something very individual and very personal. So, and then physical is obviously something external. You're exercising. And then social support is completely external, and you need some social support system to really cope with certain really severe conditions in which you don't have any control over. So, so especially in those conditions, you need some external help, or somebody to direct you to that control pathway. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the coping mechanisms. So these are some of the coping methods. So these are problem-focused coping methods. What we do is we confront a problem, we seek out. So this is something that we're doing on our own. So we're seeking out help, and we're trying to look for comfort and people who can help us. And we're actually trying to plan our entire coping strategy with the help of other people as well. And then we have emotion-focused coping. So this is something that can be self-taught, or actually this is something that a psychologist in the very end of their treatment plan, they actually want the patients or anybody who comes to them to be equipped with all of these things. So they want people to have self-control. They want individuals to distance themselves from the stressors in any way that they can, and if that's possible. So positive reappraisal, I will explain this in a way that, for example, if I don't get something, then I try to, come up with that argument rationally on my own, that it's ultimately for the best, and I try to reach to the conclusions that it didn't happen because that would have been the cons of if it did happen. These would have been the cons. Then ultimately I would have been the one at loss. So it's a good thing ultimately that certain thing didn't happen. So for example, let's just say that, okay, so if I'm applying for some driver's license, let's say, so I couldn't pass the test of that driver's license test. I couldn't perform that day, and then positive reprisal would be that it's a good thing that I didn't, because I'm not a good driver at this point, and if I did get the license, I probably would have damaged my somebody's car, my car, or somebody. I probably would have hurt somebody or hurt myself. So ultimately it's better that I didn't pass this exam this time, so that next time after practice, when I get my license, I'll be a better driver. So that's how positive reprisal actually works. And then accepting responsibility is something that psychologists really want their patients to incorporate into their rational thinking. And then escape and avoidance is something that is not really something that is favored, rather, but ultimately, if the stress is a little too much for you to handle, you can distance yourself, or you can avoid it for some time until it kind of eases you to go back and then address the problem. So these are some of the coping methods, and ultimately it's better for you to do it on your own, and that's the ultimate goal as well. And then we're going to talk about social supports. So social system is, you need your social support system to cope with some stresses, especially if they were unpredictable, or if you don't have a lot of control on them. So then we have stress, personality, and gender. So your gender actually determines your coping mechanism as well. So personality obviously plays a part, and we've been talking about stress in detail. So let's talk about the personalities and types of personalities. So then we have personalities, and the type that we're going to talk about is type A and B. So type A and B are the division of these types of personalities of people. So type A are people who are really just impatient, really short-tempered, and also people who are ambitious and really competitive. So being ambitious and competitive is a good thing, but then these are really short-tempered people, so that's not a good thing. So and then we have type B people. So type B people are really social. These people are really easygoing, and then these are really creative people, but then they are procrastinators. So they're not really very active or competitive or ambitious. So ups and downs in type A and B. So these are the two types of personalities that people say that are everybody in the world is either type A or type B personality. So this is one debate. And then some people actually say that the division of personality is on the basis of pessimistic viewpoints and optimistic viewpoints, or perception of events. So pessimists are people who deduct the negatives out of situation, or predict the negative, or come up with negative rationalities to every situation presented to them. And optimists are people who are really just people who are just happy souls, and they can't be put down, and they're just going to really come up with something happy about everything. But then again, even for optimistic people, I don't mean that even in utterly sensitive and utterly, unfaithful conditions, they are obviously not happy. So that's not what I mean. So, but these are just people who naturally think positively, but ultimately under stress, they do both of these type of people. So pessimists would go beyond negative, they're beyond their natural or normal negative, and optimists will go to a certain moderate level of negative thinking under stress. So this is how they will function. So these are two divisions. And then we have this very interesting Dempsey and Thista's 7 personality types. So these are pleasers. So people who are, they want to make everybody happy, and they want to make they're those social clowns who want to make everybody laugh. So these are the first type of personalities. And then there are internal timekeepers. So these are really disciplined people who want everything by the books or by the norms, and they're really just organized altogether. And then there are people who are strivers. These are people who are actually, workaholics, or people who really are thriving on hard work. And then there are people who are deceptives, the inner con artists. So these are deceiving people. And then we have some critical judges who are always going to be just critical about everything, and they're going to try and sometimes bring out the little details of things that aren't really relative. So these are critical judges. So that's a type of personality. And then there are people who are just always worried about something. So that's another type of people. And then finally, we have some really evil, mean, rude people that we call Sabretooth, which is also a character in X-Men. But here we mean that it's somebody who's really, aggressive and ruthless. So these are some classification of personalities. And then we have the physiology. So we're going to talk a little bit more about physiology. We have touched most of it, so we're just going to go through it one more time. So we have in a stressful condition, what happens is our body actually activates a stress response. So what happens is our autonomic nervous system is activated, because of which our heart rate increases, right? So then we have our neuroendocrine system activation. So we discussed that as well. So it starts with pre-cortex, and then prefrontal cortex, and then the hypothalamus, amygdala, and pituitary, adrenal, so all of that, and also catecholamine release and everything. So that's neuroendocrine activation. Then we have hemodynamic changes. So what will happen is there will be an ultimate rise in the cardiac output, BP, heart rate, pulse rate. So that's a stress response. And then coagulation activity. So fibrinogen release will be increased. We will have increased activation of platelets. There will be increased blood viscosity. So these are all as a result of these changes in hormones, as well as, cortisol, and we know all of the physiology behind that, and then immune activation. So your body's actually trying to just make sure that in a stressful condition, if there is any foreign particle entering the body, so the body doesn't know what the stress is, right? So the body is just going to make itself ready for everything. So they're going to make themselves equipped to fight any foreign bacteria, virus, or any microbe entering the body. So they're going to activate the immune system. There's going to be coagulation activation in predicting that there may be some trauma to the body in which there is excessive blood loss. So in a stressful conditions, all of these things all together occur. And then there are pathophysiological effects of these changes. So obviously, if we have increased platelets or increased fibrinogen, let's just take this one example. My eyes just hit that. So, if you have that, then there is increased susceptibility of developing a clot somewhere, and then it can dislodge and it can cause embolism or a thrombosis, or just a complete occultation or ischemia of a certain area. So let's see the pathophysiological effects of these stress responses. So we have cardiac electrical instability, which is basically cardiac arrhythmias. Then we have myocardial ischemia, which is basically not enough blood supply or no blood supply to certain parts of the cardiac muscle because of coronary artery. Any disruption in the coronary blood supply via the coronary artery. And then we have atherosclerotic plaque disruption. So this is a cholesterol plaque, atherosclerotic plaque, and this is mostly present in old age people, mostly in males who are also smokers. And then it can be disrupted and move towards the brain or the lungs or your heart. And there it can cause myocardial ischemia, stroke, etc. So then we have thrombus formation, which is actually a clot formation, which can be because of the platelets or the fibrinogen or increased viscosity, all of these factors together as well. And so all of these pathological effects then have some clinical effects, right? So these are the clinical events of these physiological events, which are ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia. So that's basically the condition right before systole or asystole. It is very rare for patients to actually come back from this condition. And again, we also have atrial fibrillation. For these patients, we use defibrillator. But if there is asystole or pulseless activity of the heart, then we use CPR to revive, but then again, the chances are low. Then we have myocardial infarction, which is basically a heart attack due to the disruption in the blood supply to the heart muscle or the myocardium itself. And then we have acute coronary syndrome, which is basically unstable angina, as well as the non-ST elevation and ST elevation myocardial infarction. Then we have promoting health behaviors. So this is very important. So these health behaviors are actually promoting a healthy lifestyle. So increasing the qualitative aspect of one's life. So how this is done is actually by incorporating into one's life the healthy activities like exercising, walking, or eating healthy, by drinking a lot of water, by taking a lot of leafy vegetables or fruits in the diet, and also protein is also very important part of a healthy diet. And then we have to promote healthy behavior, we have this stages of readiness, which is pre-contemplation. So pre-contemplation is something that the idea comes in your mind, right? So the idea of something, maybe once, maybe twice, but rare idea. So then you have contemplation. Then because of the reoccurrence of that idea, you actually think on it, and then you kind of, deduce things out of it. And then that leads you to preparation for something, and then ultimately you have action and maintenance of that action. So this is how the entire process of progress is drawn out by psychologists, and this is how one person should really, become ready for something unpredictable. And then you can actually, so just that idea of something really sad, or something that you don't want to accept. If you have that idea and then you think about it a little bit, that's kind of like preparation. So, and then relapse is actually, from actually because of some new stressful event, you go from maintenance of that, equilibrium and good thought process, or good rational, positive, optimistic thinking, and then you go back from that maintenance phase to back up that ladder, or rather down that ladder. So that's relapse. And so it's actually interchangeable. If it's going either way, it's actually relapsing. So that's never good. So that's these are some of the stages of readiness for an event that is unpredictable, or is not really acceptable by mind. Then we have programs for coping with stress to promote health. So these are, yogas and exercising, and just all of these really healthy activities, like going for a walk, and all of these things actually do matter, because they're important for your inner peace, and you have time to really contemplate and think upon and ponder upon your life and everything that's happening around you. So these type of things actually do take a lot of importance when we're talking about psychology and its impact. So the promotion of a healthy lifestyle is an entire domain, and encompasses within itself a lot of different things. So that's with this, we wrap up our lecture. Today we talked about psychological stresses. We talked about how different types of stresses actually affect the physiological functioning of the body. We talked about types of personalities. We talked about the mediation of stresses. We talked about body response of stresses. And then we kind of ended with how to cope with these stresses. And with that, I hope that it was helpful for everybody. And with that, we end today's lecture. Thank you for watching.